Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of Lightning Interviews. Hope everyone's looking forward to what I'm sure is a very well-deserved weekend. And as always, we like to make these sessions interesting and interactive. So please do introduce yourself, share your own story, tell us where you're from, tell us what you're doing. You can see the message channel pop up there on your right. Now, before we get started with today's interview, I have a few quick points about upcoming events at ODSC and AI Plus I'd like to make. So we do have a number of free webinars coming up February 22nd and March 1st. We also do have a live training coming up with Marivna Singh on March 3rd. And then, of course, we have the ever excellent John Cron with his Deep Learning Bootcamp that is continuing. And our main event for the spring is ODSC East is back in person if you want to check that out. And you can definitely check out a lot of cool startups and other people participating at the AI Expo. You can sign up for that for free. So you can see the URL code, or rather the QR code there on the right. So you can grab that at your convenience if you have your camera ready. Unless you got a photographic memory, you can figure out that bit.ly link. And everyone always asks us this question, but yes, these sessions are recorded, so you can catch up on this later. And for those of you just getting into the world of deep learning, machine learning, and AI, don't forget to check out our mini bootcamp, which you can see on our website. Pretty exciting lineup we have there, and that's 4 full days. And also for those of you looking to get started in your careers, we do have our community platform that's free to job seekers and also those offering jobs. So either put a job on there or look for a new career. So that is what we have for news today. So I'm very excited to introduce today's guest. And let's see if we can bring him to the front. Sofian.
Hello.
So Sofian Audry is an artist, scholar, and professor of interactive media with the School of Media at the University of Quebec in the ever excellent city of Montreal. And now Sofian is also the author of one of the most insightful books I've read recently on machine learning. It certainly opened my eyes to the unbelievable creativity possibilities of art and ML, and the book is titled Art in the Age of Machine Learning. So, Sofian, you're most welcome to the show. And before we dive into the book and topics contained therein, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today. Well, you've said a big part of it, but maybe to complete, I'm a transdisciplinary artist, researcher. I have a mixed background in AI, machine learning first, and also then in digital arts. And I'm interested in artistic practice at the connection, at the nexus of generative art, digital arts, and machine learning and AI, and also artificial life. So these kinds of autonomous. So how things that drive me are questions about how do artists can and do explore or use techniques that are to a certain extent, to a large extent, out of their direct control, such as machine learning, to create new kinds of art and music and literature.
Excellent. And yeah, as you mentioned, you studied under Yoshua Bengio, the AI master, who definitely needs no introduction to this audience. And he actually wrote a foreword for your book. Now, as for the book itself, I must say, as I mentioned earlier, it really did surprise me because, first of all, what I know about art is definitely not extensive. And so I did expect to learn more about that. But I love the way that you brought the reader through a journey, both through the history of machine learning, deep learning, and computerized art. But in addition to that, it's an extremely well-written introduction to machine learning fundamentals, such as supervised learning, unsupervised learning, reinforcement learning, GANs. I could go on and on. So congratulations on what is a very well-written and insightful book. And the question I have to ask you, because we all know writing a book is quite an endeavor. What inspired you to write Art in the Age of Machine Learning?
Well, it's actually related to what you just said. Is that I felt that there was a lot of like when I did my I did my PhD. I finished in 2000. So between 2011 and 2016, I worked I did a PhD in humanities, interdisciplinary PhD at Concordia University, and I during those years I like deep learning really started to appear and on the scene, like and there was a lot of discussions around these new techniques, and this is when it became really quickly also integrated into the industry. So it was I saw it was interesting because I was an artist then. I had been an artist for about a decade already, and I saw all of my previous colleagues, for example, in the field of machine learning, who had stayed in that field, suddenly were moving to California and moving to the UK and like going to work for big companies, because suddenly like these techniques that had been kind of left in the 1990s, as for many people it was neural networks and all this was still perceived a bit as a kind of a dead end. But there were people like Yoshua Bengio who were still believing in that was the that was the way to really approach AI, to work with these learning systems that were self-organized and everything. And so during those years, I noticed that there were appearing a lot of, first of all, there was a growing interest from artists, from artistic communities. There was a growing interest from engineering communities for art, but there were also a lot of myths, let's say, on all sides, the misconceptions that I believe needed to be addressed. So I thought, I know this stuff pretty well. I've been, trained with Yoshua Bengio. I also know the artistic side. So maybe I could be the right person to write a book that would be able to speak to this audience, especially primarily to an audience of artists, curators, media theorists, art students who were possibly interested in the subject, but did not necessarily know what was possible, where to start, didn't necessarily have the mathematical knowledge to go online and read some Python scripts, just to give them like a starting point. And what's interesting is that what I noticed also is that especially, and I think like the excellent foreword by Yoshua Bengio, I'm so lucky that Yoshua accepted to write this foreword, which is absolutely to the point and excellent. I think it also perhaps helped attract another audience that I did not suspect would react so well to the book, which was an audience of people who are more, not necessarily artists, who are more on the side of technology, or more engineers, computer scientists, people interested in data science. And it seems that also this audience is responding really well to that book. So what inspired me to write it? Yeah, I wrote that book kind of thinking, if I was one of these people, if I was an artist, if I was an undergrad in the interactive media program like where I teach, what kind of book would I like to read, to understand the ramifications, the history, understand how, like, the materiality of these algorithms, how they're organized, and look at it through, by looking at it through the eyes of artists, through the eyes of practice, looking at different examples in the arts where all of these issues are being looked at and examined. So
no, and so glad you did. As a data scientist myself, I found that a really inspiring book. And let's get into it. So what is machine learning art? Like, how would you describe that?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, well, I mean, it's I would say a loosely organized movement that is as historical ramifications, and like any kind of category in what we would call, let's say, new media art or digital art, like any of these categories, it's a non-exclusive category. Okay, so there's
Right.
you can do and also it also can apply maybe to people who would not necessarily think what they're doing is machine learning art, or and they might be doing machine learning art, but also if it's maybe through a form of robotic art, for example, or
Right.
something that they might think, they might say that they're generative artists but still do machine learning art. So it's a non-exclusive category that covers artistic works and artistic approaches that use machine learning, but use machine learning specifically, I would say, for the specific kind of qualities or ways of affordances and material organization of machine learning algorithms. So by that I mean, and this is something I explain in the book, is that I'm not looking in this book at artists who are, talking about machine learning or approaching machine learning, but through a completely different art form, like, I don't know, painting. So maybe I can make a painting about machine learning, or a performance to criticize AI or to address some of its issues. So that's not part of that field to me. And then on the other side, if you have people, artists who are using, so for example, if you're designing an interactive artwork where you need some kind of face detection system, some kind of computer vision system. So in the past, you might have used non-machine learning approaches, but it turns out that machine learning approaches now are what works best to do many computer vision tasks. So to me, this is less part. It can be on the fringe of machine learning art, but it's not really what I'm interested in the book, because it's not necessarily a work that deals reflexively with machine learning itself. It could have been done with another technology, so it's just using it for, because it's what's the, so in other words, what you'll find in this book is a lot of artists who are using machine learning maybe not in the way it was intended, or who are really exploring the algorithms themselves and exploiting them, like tweaking them in some specific ways. So diverting them, making them their own, basically, as part of their approach. So that to me is machine learning art as I'm defining it in this book.
No, that's great. And I do love the way in the book that you can, whether it's an artist or someone more technical, they can really delve deeper into it, and lots of great examples in the book, which we'll get to later. But one chapter I really enjoyed, I think it was in chapter 1, you had discussed a number of myths and misconceptions around machine learning and art. So I think you listed 7 or 8 there, but in your view, Sofian, what's the biggest misconception you find when discussing machine learning arts with either other artists or with lay people, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the biggest misconception to me is that machine learning art just appeared. It was just appeared suddenly, like,
right.
A few years ago, like with Deep Dream and generative adversarial networks. And part of one of the arguments in the book is to say, well, actually, if you look at the history of science, first of all, if you look at the appearance of machine learning, you go back to the origins of the computer, so cybernetics,
right,
in the 40s and 50s. So it's all happening at the same time. Of course, there's different kinds of histories. You've probably all heard about the AI winters and the AI springs, right. So all these seasons and the opposition between different kinds of approaches to AI, cybernetics, and then symbolic AI, rule-based AI. the new AI of Rodney Brooks in the early end of the 80s, early 90s, neural networks, connectionism. So all of this, it's still part of that history. And if you look at if you look at art that is using some of the principles, maybe not all, but some of the principles of machine learning, such as the capacity for systems to adapt, then you actually can trace it back to the 50s. You can think about the work of Nicholas Schoeffer, for example, who created these cybernetic systems that were adapting to themselves, and they were embedded in their environment, and that he tried also to present with dancers in front of the Eiffel Tower. And today you have similar things happening with also just more advanced systems but they still have the same kind of idea behind them. And the book starts also with actually the introduction starts with one of these very important examples, which is the work of Nicholas Baginski, who in the early 90s used the neural networks to train to create this robotic band, which is an amazing project that he ran for more than a decade. Right. So it didn't just appear yesterday. So I think that's probably the biggest misconception that people have, and I hope I was able to kind of nuance it or break it down in the book.
No, you did. That was excellent. And again, just loved the way you brought the reader on a journey through the history of computerized art, so to speak. But when I was reading it, it actually it kind of does beg the question. You give some great examples in your book. Think about video, photography, these new tools which became new mediums. So in my mind, it does beg the question: like, is machine learning art, does it make the both the creation and consumption of art more accessible, or is it just another medium?
Mm-hmm. I think both. I think the both are true in the sense that first of all, I have to say that machine learning is really broad. As a field, there's a lot of techniques inside of it. We've heard a lot about neural networks and deep learning, but that's not the only possibility. There's many other kinds of models. I talk about evolutionary systems, genetic algorithms, for example. There's all kinds of approaches that are applied to all kinds of different situations. But broadly speaking, still, I would say that definitely it changes the game in terms, first of all, of the creation, because it does. We've seen techniques emerge that, especially with deep learning, where you have systems that are able to really work well with raw data. So meaning that you don't have to pre-process data. You don't have to. I mean, machine learning used to be, when I studied neural networks in the early 2000s with Yoshua Bengio, there were a number of tricks of the trade you needed to learn to, kind of pre-digest the data to feed it to the system. So it was, you needed to have a lot of, it required a lot of expertise because not everything was automated, to put it simply. So today it's a bit easier. You can have, off-the-shelf models. There's even softwares that exist like Runway ML or the Wikinator that make it much more approachable, much more easy for artists to try it out, to work with these techniques, and it does accelerate, and some part of the work, and it does lower, for example, if you're able to generate images and sound and text, then maybe you can produce movies or stories or I don't know, comic books, whatever, more
No,
easily.
exactly. Yeah.
Because you can think, for example, the project Rewrites by David Johnston, where he's a poet, and he trained a system on English poetry, and he wrote one book of poetry per month for a year, which is an
Wow.
impossible feat normally.
Yeah.
But he did that. He did it because he was able to collaborate in a way, so the system would generate texts that he would then review and re-edit to improve it and make it more his own. So that's on one side. I would say definitely it makes everything more accessible. But it's also, I think, definitely it's also another medium, or even I would even say it's several new media. Like because there's different kinds of machine learning, supervised learning, unsupervised learning, reinforcement learning. We could think that all of these could be media standing on their own. They each have their own specificities and everything. GANs, on their just generative adversarial networks, there's so much work that's been done with that you see a whole set of new kinds of art forms emerging just on that side, and they each have their different. Just back to the consumption of art, they also have different kinds of consumption affordances and consumption markets, let's say. So generative images made with AI, for example, have been really popular on the NFT markets, because they're digital images that are usually hard to, it's not because, I don't think it's necessarily so much because they're made with AI, but it's just in general the same kind of people who are interested in AI are also people interested in NFT. So there are different I think there's new opportunities, new markets opening, and I think, and I make some suggestions about that in the book, how there could also be, I think, and I'm strongly encouraging curators also to rethink maybe the kinds of ways that they can present art, because you can think about I don't know, works that people could bring back to their home and that would adapt to their own life, or artworks that would evolve over the scope of many months or many years. There's it's just different ways of presenting these works and consuming these works, and I think we've just seen the tip of the iceberg thus far. I think the best is yet to come.
No, that's a great answer to that question, because it's just so broad, and there's so many exciting things happening. And even over the last couple of years, what you mentioned around generative arts, and look at GPT-3, there's whole books coming out being written using just GPT-3. So we'll get into some more of that generative art in a second. And absolutely, I would encourage our listeners to try out some of this stuff yourself. I've played around with Google Magenta. Great tool for making mixes and whatnot. And this does all, lead to the questions, which I think is a difficult question to answer, because maybe it's as old as art itself. But so who will appreciate, or who does appreciate machine learning art? Like, who's the audience for this?
Yeah, that's a hard question for me. I haven't.
For anybody, Sofian, I'm sure.
Yeah, I haven't also really reflected much about this in the book. But one thing that comes to mind is that, and this is something I discuss in the book, is that if you look at machine learning, one of the characteristics, especially true, I would say, with systems like neural networks, or especially deep learning, where you have these systems that are they recognize certain kinds of patterns, but they don't do this through trying to find some kind of explainable rules. They do it using some kind of simulation of what happens in the brain, and which could be seen as some kind of advanced statistical system. So what this means in terms of for digital arts is that it's much harder for the audience to see these work and try to understand them using logic. So I'll give you I'll make it a parallel or an example coming from my own experience. So I work as an artist. I've done many works with robotic systems, and there used to be a time where I was not working with machine learning, and so I would work with just rule-based systems, and you have the robot that does a certain action when, I don't know, when the sun falls, when the sun sets, the robot starts behaving in a certain way, or you know, when the audience moves in a certain way, it will react. So I then very often the thing is that you know, people are curious about these works, and when I really like the contact with the audience, so they come to me when I show the work and I have the chance to be there at the opening, for example, and people would come to me and say, oh, the first question they'd ask is, how does it work? And I really hated that question. And, you know, like I spoke with other robotic artists, and they were like, this is kind of a running gag, I would say, for robotic artists, that like we hate that question because
thanks,
it's
Sophie. That was actually my next question. How does that work? But anyway, thank you for
yeah. So so well, the question my response used to be, first of all, how do you think it works? And then I would, and then people would come up with that was the interesting story for me, because people would say, well, I think, you know, this robot is trying to play, or he's trying to, I think this robot hates this other robot. So they've come up with their own ideas about it, which to me is the most important. But with machine learning now, what's interesting to me is that I don't even have to respond to the question anymore, because what I say is, when they ask me how does it work, I say, actually, I don't really know. You will have to try it out. You'll have to engage with it, and I think it creates a different kinds of it changes. It transforms the relationship between the audience and the work, and it forces maybe a more engagement from the audiences, because they really need to spend time with the work to get to know it. It's really not, and it's not explainable. So in a way, it's closer maybe to non-digital arts in that sense, you know, because it wouldn't even be explainable if we were trying to explain it, because it's, you know, very, very much based on these kinds of, you know, statistical models. So in the end, the result also is that you have to apprehend them in a different way. And it's not for everyone. Some people like to have this instant gratification, and that's okay. There's still, you know, there's tons of interactive artworks where people just move in front of a camera and things happen, and I'm fine with that. But I think the audience who would most appreciate machine learning art would be an audience that would be open to questioning themselves, and to spend time, you know, and just experience these works and see how it transforms them. Because you can't really tell, but what we found is that by showing these kinds of work is that when we get so one strategy, for example, we've been using is to make people comfortable and have them come into a space. I have a new robotic work now where I think we're going to ask people to remove their shoes before they go in the space, put really comfortable, chairs, so that they can just hang out and stay there for long enough that they would just experience the work without having to think about, okay, what is there some kind of causal relationship that I can explain?
No, and I love the story you're giving about people asking you about what is how does it work, because even as machine learning engineers and data scientists ourselves, we struggle for bringing observability and transparency to our work. So then when you put art on top of that, there's yet another layer you have to explain. So that's great. Now, Sofian, you kind of touched upon it, generative art and generative models and all that stuff. And, I think that's taken the data science, machine learning, data science world by storm for sure. And everyone's got their favorite example of generative art, and maybe it was Obama speaking. I think for me it was Nathan Shipley, who used he used a deep fake to bring to life Salvador Dali, and also historical figures like Henry VIII. If you've ever seen that, it's awesome. And then of course we've got the aptly named the Van Goghs of the world. And you have to wonder, when Ian Goodfellow invented GANs, what was that, in 2015, if he knew what he was unleashing on the world. But so give us your insights on how deep fakes, as you call them, deep remixes, or actually a term you used in your book, which I really like. You call it digital puppetry. How's that being used to make art, and you know where that whole trend is going?
One of the things I've been like, if we can speak very broadly about what's happening with these systems, the deep fakes, and also the voice, the voice imprints or style transfer. So what we get is these reusable usually pre-trained models that we can, once they're trained, we can exchange them. We can, they're a bit like open source code, and you've seen that now that more and more people are actually now working with more increasingly with these pre-trained models, because some of them cost so much to train, like the GPT-3, right. Costs like several tens of millions of dollars, I think, to train. Exactly. So people can't do it. So, but they can build from it. So I think that's so that's all part of what I've been calling in the book some kind of a new modal-based or algorithmic remix culture, or transition and remix culture, where you can now not just remix existing content, but you can remix algorithms in a way. So you can remix processes. And the deep fakes are a good example of that, because you can actually, it's a bit like, it's similar to style transfer in a way. So it just increases the possibilities that you can have of, so it's not anymore that you just, let's say, can do it in the image world, where you would in Photoshop, replace a face with another. You can actually automate that process, and then very easily, or much more easily than before, just transfer it and explore the possibilities of these remixes. So one example I would like to point that's been coming up actually just recently of that is so Holly Herndon, who's this amazing artist, musician, composer, who I was talked about in the book actually, because she produced a few years ago one of the first very interesting remix of that type with voice, in collaboration with the artist Jlin. And now Holly just released a system called Holly Plus, and basically she's been she's trained a model on her own voice, and is now giving access to anyone. So she's put her voice imprint in the comments. So that's really interesting.
Absolutely fascinating. Yeah,
it's fascinating. So it's not, because we've seen, with new media, we've seen with the free software movement, the open source movement, the Creative Commons. We've seen all of this remix culture evolving with the digital, and having these people sharing content. In this kind of other, which opens this other kind of economy also, this other creative economy, where people can reuse a song that was liberated for free for their student film project, and or take an image and change it and redistribute it while crediting the person who first made it. So, and now we have that with processes or modal. So we have now the modal of the voice of Holly Herndon is in the commons. So anyone can now sing with the voice of Hurley Herndon. And I think we'll see clearly more of that in the future. And I mean, there are, of course, issues with that, but I think in the end, it's probably the best approach will be to do what Hurley did, to, instead of trying to protect all of this, to instead embrace it and say, okay, well, let's exchange these models, these systems, let's release them into the commons with some kinds of protection, with some kinds of so basing ourselves on the existing copyright laws, but preserving some rights, but also allowing others to reuse, remix our own.
No, definitely, yeah, and definitely, Sofian, it's it's an incredibly important and fascinating topic around copyright law and intellectual property. I don't know if you came across it, but when was it, a while ago, Jay-Z, someone created a rap song of Jay-Z rapping to the works of Shakespeare, but it wasn't, it was just they were cloning his voice, and he was pretty unhappy about it. So that didn't feel very wrong at all. And then if you look in GitHub at the moment, like if you look under machine learning, like one of the top 10 or top 20 repos out there is it's called real-time voice cloning, and I used this myself a month ago. I just gave it 10 seconds of audio, and it did a pretty good job of, like, I got a really messed up accent. It's kind of this Irish American accent. It did a pretty decent job of uploading it to cloning my voice. And funny story, I tried to get it up on Google Home, and then when you ask Google Home a question, it was coming out in my voice. It was driving my kids crazy.
Wow.
So they made me take it off. So that was kind of funny, but in more seriousness, we have to think about, and again, lots of movies are starting to use, deep learning GANs and generating voices for actors, regenerating actors that have passed many years ago. So deep fakes, voice cloning, deep remixes. This is going to make have a profound impact. And when you look at the whole artistry around remixes alone, so it's going to have a huge impact on IP. And I love your story around Holly and the fact that she's embraced that she's IP'd and released her voice for people to use. But yeah, just expand on that topic a bit, because it's a fascinating topic, and I think it's going to be one for years to come. We're only at the tip of the iceberg here, so to speak, with this generative era.
Yes, absolutely. And well, I mean, like, also we have to also, like, I've been sounding really positive with that,
Right.
But also there are very important issues also in terms of because and I think perhaps even more so, what I'm more worried about is that we are with machine learning, we are in this economy that is dominated by a few companies that have a lot of hold on the data. So and we've seen, I think over the time we'll deal with probably we'll have to address that in terms of antitrust laws to make sure that at least some of this data gets is a bit better managed in terms of its access. Because one issue we can have, and that's definitely is already the case, is that there's this economy of data ownership where the people who produce the data. So I'll take the example of music, let's say, but it can be applied to a lot of data. So if you're able to create an algorithm that is trained on the work of other artists, and then you don't need the artists anymore,
Right.
you can just run a radio station fully generative, without paying anyone who actually has created the data that you're using to train your system. So that's where I think we have to be vigilant. It is it is problem. That part is problematic, but it's not just. I think it's a problem that's not specific to the creative industry. I think it's just at large. There is a problem right now with the fact that the labor that goes into producing the large data sets that we are using for doing any kind of machine learning application is very often under-recognized labor. It was actually one of the artists that I talk about in the book. There's a whole section about her work. Her name is Anna Riddler. She was actually one of the first few people to use GANs in a very, very unique, very special way, and with a very deep reflection as part of her artistic process. And what she did is that she created this generative piece that creates images of tulips. But to do that, she set to create her own data set. So she would fly or take the train from London to Amsterdam, and would buy.
To do that,
she had a huge grant, I think, from the Art Council, and she bought tulips, and she had to choose also which tulips, what colors, to kind of balance a data set in order to be able to train her generative system. But and what she said was that one of the things she realized, and that she wanted also to show as part of this piece, is the insane amount of labor that goes into it, which is akin to a form of craft, which historically has been, often, under-recognized as something. So I think this is definitely one aspect of it. And maybe one last element is, like for sampling, of course, laws will need to be adapted, like they have been for sampling, where it was recognized. It's recognized nowadays that you can make a remix of a song by another artist and release it as your own. But there's a few things you need to respect, and one of these things is probably the originality and the work you put into it. So this is where I'm always kind of smiling when I see these these papers online on Medium or on the blogs or on social media, where people are like, oh, I used this GAN. I trained it on some images of, I don't know, my backyard, and wow, I'm an artist. And
I mean, around that makes money, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is that, well, if it's images of my backyard, no problem. But if, let's say, you're using somebody else's, so if somebody would take the images from Anna, who took years to document these tulips, and then would train a system on these tulips, and then just generate tulips and say, wow, this is my work now, that would probably not. It shouldn't stand, in the court of law, I think, because there needs to be some kind of work, labor that is done, artistic labor. It needs to be part of an artistic process. So, so I think that goes around. At least, I mean, we're not out of the woods with all of this, but
no, not in the least.
I think a lot of lawyers are going to make a lot of money in the coming years if they go.
As always, yeah. No,
but
it's a fascinating topic, and as you rightly said, a lot of people are very nervous about it. But we shall see how it evolves over the coming years. And Sofian, how can people find out more about your work and what you're working on? You touched upon it earlier, but what about some of the great stuff that you're working on yourself?
Well, first of all, you can go to my website, sofianaudry.com. There's on the website they'll find the work that have been released. The thing is that currently I'm also I have a number of works in progress. So if you subscribe to my my Twitter or my Instagram, you will, I'm posting regularly some updates on these works. Currently, I'm working on a few projects. One of them is it's a work in collaboration with artist Rosalie Dumont-Gagné, where we're creating robots that are all shaped like they're ball bots, so they're shaped like spheres, and they have some kind of we've designed some kinds of different kinds of skins made of silicon. So one of them is a bit more looks more like a bit more concave, another more convex, another more round. So they have different bodies, but the same kind of system inside. And we're using a reinforcement learning to design emergent behaviors in these robots that would happen in real time, which is really tricky, because the thing is that what we've realized is that we have to come up with really, 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 really simple objectives for the robot so that they can learn in real time, but objectives that are simple but that do yield interesting behaviors. So, for example, the first big eureka moment of this work was then one day we were trying all kinds of things that was too complicated. The robots, it didn't seem that they were learning anything, and one day we reinforced them to stop moving, so they would be happy, let's say, when they do no movement. But at the beginning, the robots they didn't know how to behave, so they would actually move a lot, and then eventually they would start kind of oscillating and dancing, and eventually they would stop. And when it stops, the show is over. So, but it's
and that's a great example how the creative process still exists, but it's just different for AI and machine learning, and in your case, reinforcement learning. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So that's one work I'm doing, and I have a few others down the road. So if you subscribe to my Instagram and you keep yourself updated on my website, you'll see more coming in next year.
Excellent. Well, I would encourage all of our listeners to check out your website, subscribe to your Instagram. And Sofian, we're pretty much out of time, but I just wanted to tell you it was an absolute delight having you on the show. Such an insightful discussion on such a fantastic topic, and I would encourage everyone to go out, buy your book, read it. It's well worth the read. So Sofian, we shall chat again. Thank you so much for being on the show. Wonderful to have you.
The pleasure was all mine. Thanks a lot for having me on the show.
Thank you, Sofian. Bye now.